James Harrington's Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished concrete floor of Emerald Corner Cafe, a sound that usually announced his presence in boardrooms across Seattle. Today, however, no one looked up. No assistant rushed to pull out his chair, no business partners straightened their ties, and certainly no one prepared to take notes on his every word. At 34, James had grown accustomed to commanding attention, a side effect of building Nexus Technologies into a billion-dollar empire. The cafe smelled of freshly ground coffee beans and something sweet he couldn't quite place. Cinnamon, maybe. It was 7:30 on a Tuesday morning, and the place buzzed with the gentle hum of conversation and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. James had stumbled upon this spot by accident, having walked an extra 6 blocks after a particularly frustrating call with his executive team. "Your usual spot is taken," announced a voice tinged with amusement. James looked up from his phone to find a woman in her late 20s watching him with raised eyebrows. Her dark, curly hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her green apron bore the cafe's logo, a stylized coffee cup with a tiny emerald. Her name tag read, Ruby. "I don't have a usual spot," he replied automatically. "Exactly," she said with a smile that reached her eyes. "But you look like a man searching for something familiar in unfamiliar territory. First-timers always get that look, like they've accidentally walked into someone else's living room." Despite himself, James felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. "That obvious, huh?" "I'm a waitress. Reading people is an occupational requirement," Ruby replied, gesturing toward a small table by the window. "How about there? It has the added benefit of actual sunlight, which, judging by your complexion, you could use a little more of." "Are you always this direct with customers?" James asked, unable to decide if he was amused or irritated by her candor. "Only the ones who look like they haven't smiled in the last fiscal quarter." She pulled out a notepad. "What can I get you?" "Double espresso. No sugar." Ruby scribbled on her pad. "Anything else? We have pastries that might actually trigger happiness." "Just the espresso." "Coming right up, Mr. Harrington." James Harrington. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, but unlike most people who connected his name to his net worth, Ruby merely nodded. "Well, Mr. Harrington, prepare to experience the best espresso in Seattle. It's a bold claim, but we stand by it." As she walked away, James found himself watching her, the confident stride, the way she greeted other customers by name, the genuine laugh she shared with an elderly couple in the corner. There was something refreshing about her demeanor, a stark contrast to the calculated interactions he'd grown accustomed to in his world. His phone buzzed insistently. 3 missed calls from Diane, his VP of operations, and 7 urgent emails about the product launch scheduled for next week. The momentary reprieve shattered as reality came flooding back. He'd stepped out of the office for 15 minutes, and apparently the world was ending. James was halfway through a terse email response when Ruby returned, placing a small cup on the table with surprising gentleness for someone so forthright. "Your liquid productivity, sir," she said, then slid a folded napkin beside it. "And something extra." Before he could ask what she meant, Ruby had moved on to another table, leaving James staring at the folded napkin with uncharacteristic hesitation. In his experience, unexpected notes usually came from people who wanted something: money, connections, or worse, a piece of his increasingly limited time. Curiosity won. He unfolded the napkin to find a message written in blue ink. "Your smile is worth more than your stock options. Try using it sometime." James froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. He looked up, searching for Ruby, and found her watching him from behind the counter with a challenging smile. When their eyes met, she didn't look away. Instead, she pantomimed a smile, exaggeratedly pulling the corners of her mouth upward. For the first time in months, possibly years, James Harrington laughed, not the polite chuckle he deployed at business functions or the sarcastic huff that punctuated difficult board meetings, a genuine laugh that caught him completely off guard. Ruby gave him a thumbs up before turning to prepare another order, leaving James to sit with an unfamiliar feeling, something between indignation and delight. His phone buzzed again. The real world demanded his attention, but for some reason he couldn't bring himself to look away from the handwritten note. Who did this waitress think she was? And more puzzling, why did her presumption not bother him as much as it should? The espresso was indeed exceptional, rich without being bitter, perfectly extracted. James found himself savoring it rather than gulping it down as he usually did. When he finished, he left $20 on the table, far more than necessary for a $4 espresso, and headed toward the door. "Hope to see that smile again, Mr. Harrington," Ruby called out as he passed the counter. He turned, surprising himself by responding, "It's just James." "Ruby Martinez," she replied, extending her hand over the counter. Her handshake was firm, confident. "And just so you know, leaving excessive tips won't make me less direct. It might even encourage me." "I'll keep that in mind," James said, finding himself smiling again despite his best efforts not to. Outside, Seattle greeted him with its typical morning drizzle, but somehow it felt less gloomy than usual. "You did what?" Zoe's eyes widened as she restocked the pastry display later that afternoon. Ruby shrugged, wiping down the counter with practiced efficiency. "I gave him a note telling him to smile. You told James Harrington, the James Harrington, that his smile is worth more than his stock options?" Zoe looked torn between horror and admiration. "The man's worth billions, Ruby. Actual billions. And you basically told him money can't buy happiness? Cliché, I know, but you should have seen him, Zoe. The man looked like he was carrying the weight of Seattle on his shoulders. Maybe because he literally employs half of Seattle?" Ruby rolled her eyes. "Hardly. Though from what I've read, Nexus Technologies is one of the better places to work. Great benefits, paternity leave, that sort of thing. Since when do you follow tech billionaires?" Zoe asked, arranging blueberry muffins in a perfect line. "Since Tyler became obsessed with them. My brother thinks James Harrington walks on water. Started coding because of him." Ruby sighed, thinking of her younger brother's dorm room plastered with motivational quotes from tech entrepreneurs. "Besides, I recognized him from that charity gala feature in the Seattle Times last month." The afternoon rush began, and conversation gave way to the rhythmic dance of taking orders, making drinks, and ensuring customers left satisfied. By the time they reached closing, Ruby had almost forgotten about her encounter with the solemn-eyed millionaire. Almost. As she counted the register, her mind wandered back to his expression when he'd read her note. Confusion followed by something that looked remarkably like vulnerability, there and gone in an instant. Then that laugh, surprising and genuine. "Earth to Ruby," Zoe waved a hand in front of her face. "I asked if you're coming to Casey's birthday thing tomorrow night. Sorry, can't. I promised Mom I'd help with inventory at the restaurant." Ruby's parents had owned Alma Latina, a small but beloved Mexican restaurant in Beacon Hill, for 27 years. End-of-month madness. "Your parents need to hire actual help instead of relying on you every time they're short-staffed," Zoe said, not for the first time. "They're struggling enough as it is with the rent increase." Ruby shrugged, trying to sound casual, despite the knot of worry that formed whenever she thought about her parents' financial situation. Besides, free dinner. On her bus ride home, Ruby's thoughts drifted between concern for her family's restaurant and curiosity about whether James Harrington would return to the cafe. Probably not. Men like him had assistants to fetch their coffee from places much fancier than Emerald Corner. Her apartment welcomed her with familiar comfort. Small but meticulously organized, filled with second-hand furniture she'd lovingly restored and plants that thrived despite the limited Seattle sunlight. On her refrigerator hung a collage of magazine cutouts, pictures of bakeries and cafes, her dream taking visual form. Ruby's phone chimed with a text from her mother. "Don't forget to bring the marketing ideas tomorrow. Love you, Mija." You died. With a sigh, Ruby opened her laptop and pulled up the document she'd been working on for weeks, a comprehensive plan to help Alma Latina attract a younger crowd without alienating their loyal customers. Her parents remained skeptical about social media and modern marketing techniques, but with their lease renewal approaching and rates climbing throughout the neighborhood, they'd finally agreed to consider her suggestions. Around midnight, Ruby closed her laptop and crawled into bed, setting her alarm for 5:30. As she drifted off to sleep, her mind conjured an unexpected image: James Harrington's surprised smile, a crack in a carefully constructed facade. "You seem distracted," Diane noted as she placed a stack of contracts on James's desk the following morning. "The Tokyo team has been waiting for 15 minutes. James glanced at the conference room, visible through his office's glass wall, where several executives were gathered around a video call. "Tell them I'll be there in 5. When Diane left, James turned his chair toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Seattle. Somewhere in that sprawl of buildings and streets was a small cafe where, for a few minutes yesterday, he'd felt something other than the constant pressure that had become his normal. He'd built Nexus Technologies from a dorm room project into a global enterprise employing thousands. The journey had consumed him so completely that somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten what it felt like to simply exist without purpose or agenda. Yesterday's interaction with the waitress, Ruby, had been devoid of the usual calculations that characterized his daily interactions. "Your smile is worth more than your stock options." The note sat in his wallet, inexplicably kept rather than discarded. His intercom buzzed. "Tokyo is asking for you specifically, James. On my way." The day unfolded as most did, meetings bleeding into more meetings, decisions stacked upon decisions, the constant hum of a company that never truly slept. By 3 in the afternoon, James had resolved 2 potential crises, approved the acquisition of a promising startup, and revised the speech he was scheduled to deliver at next month's tech conference. "Your 4 o'clock cancelled," his assistant announced through the intercom. "Next meeting is at 5:30. James stared at his computer screen, then made a decision that surprised even himself. "I'm stepping out. I'll be back for the 5:30. 20 minutes later, he found himself pushing open the door to Emerald Corner Cafe, immediately enveloped by the comforting aroma of coffee and baked goods. The afternoon crowd filled most tables, the ambient chatter creating a pleasant backdrop. Ruby stood behind the counter, expertly crafting what appeared to be an elaborate latte, complete with foam art. She looked up as the bell above the door announced his arrival, her surprise quickly giving way to a smile. "Well, well," she called out as he approached. "The smile is back for a refill." James felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. "I've been told your espresso is the best in Seattle. Had to verify the claim. Twice in 2 days. I'm flattered." Ruby handed the finished latte to a waiting customer before turning her full attention to James. "Same as yesterday." "Actually," James found himself saying, "I'll try whatever you recommend." Something like approval flashed in Ruby's eyes. "Bold choice, trusting a stranger with your caffeine needs. Consider it a calculated risk." "In that case," she reached for a ceramic mug. "You strike me as someone who appreciates complexity." James watched as she prepared his drink with practiced precision, her movements efficient yet almost artistic. When she placed the mug before him, the rich aroma made his mouth water. "Cortado," Ruby explained. "Equal parts espresso and steamed milk. Strong but not overwhelming. Complex flavor profile but accessible." "Sounds like you've put thought into this pairing." "Like I said, reading people is part of the job." She leaned against the counter. "So, James Harrington, what brings a tech mogul back to our humble establishment? Surely you have people who fetch your coffee." "Maybe I wanted to see if you had more unsolicited advice to offer," he replied, surprising himself with the playfulness in his tone. Ruby laughed, the sound warm and uninhibited. "I save my best material for repeat customers. You'll have to earn it." As James took his first sip, he was struck by the perfect balance of bitter and sweet, strong yet smooth. "This is excellent." "I know," Ruby said without a hint of modesty. "It's a gift." A group of customers entered, and Ruby excused herself to take their orders. James found a small table by the window, observing the cafe's dynamics with newfound interest. Ruby moved between customers with easy confidence, remembering names and preferences, creating an atmosphere that felt personal despite the steady flow of people. His phone buzzed with emails and messages, but for once James let them wait. Instead, he savored his cortado and the strange sense of anonymity the cafe provided. Here, he wasn't the founder and CEO of Nexus Technologies. He was just another customer seeking a moment of respite. When Ruby approached his table again, she carried a small plate with a pastry. "On the house," she said, placing it before him. "Cinnamon roll, baked fresh this morning. I don't usually eat carbs, indulge in simple pleasures, accept gifts without analyzing the ulterior motive." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "It's just a cinnamon roll, James, not a corporate takeover." The unexpected accuracy of her assessment startled a laugh out of him. "Are you always this perceptive, or am I particularly transparent? Let's just say you're not the first person to walk in here wearing success like heavy armor." She nodded toward the pastry. "Try it. Life's too short for bad coffee and missed cinnamon rolls." As Ruby returned to the counter, James broke off a piece of the pastry, the aroma of cinnamon and butter rising to meet him. The first bite was a revelation, sweet but not cloying, the dough perfectly soft with just the right amount of resistance. He was halfway through when his phone rang. Diane, probably wondering where he was. With reluctance, James answered, confirming that yes, he would be back for the 5:30 meeting, and no, there was no emergency. When he looked up, Ruby was watching him from behind the counter, her expression unreadable. James raised the mug in a small salute, and she responded with a smile that seemed to hold a question. As he prepared to leave, James approached the counter one last time. "What do I owe you?" $5.75 for the cortado, Ruby replied. "The cinnamon roll and unsolicited life advice come free of charge." James handed her a $10 bill. "Keep the change." "Planning to make this a habit?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes curious. "Maybe," James admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "Your coffee lives up to its reputation." "Just the coffee," Ruby challenged. James found himself smiling again, his third genuine smile in 2 days, which might be some sort of personal record. "The company isn't bad either." As he turned to leave, Ruby called after him. "Same time tomorrow?" James paused at the door, looking back at the waitress, who had somehow managed to disrupt his carefully ordered world with nothing more than a handwritten note and unfiltered honesty. "We'll see," he replied, but they both knew he'd be back. Outside, the late afternoon sun broke through Seattle's clouds, casting the city in a golden light that seemed, somehow, full of possibility. 3 weeks had passed since James Harrington first stumbled into Emerald Corner Cafe, and against all expectations, including his own, he had become a regular. The staff now greeted him by name, and his cortado appeared on the counter almost as soon as he walked through the door. "You're late," Ruby announced on Friday morning, sliding his drink across the counter. "Important Millionaire business?" "Board meeting ran long," James replied, grateful for the rich aroma that promised temporary salvation from his morning headache. "Quarterly projections." Ruby studied his face. "That bad?" "That good, actually. We're expanding faster than anticipated. And yet you look like someone stole your favorite calculator." Ruby leaned against the counter. "Let me guess, success means more responsibility, more meetings, and less of whatever it is that actually makes you happy." James sipped his cortado, buying time before answering. "You make it sound simple." "Most things are simpler than we make them." Ruby glanced at the clock. "My break's in 10 minutes. Want company?" This was new. Their interactions had been confined to brief exchanges over the counter or occasional conversation when Ruby delivered his order. The prospect of an actual conversation without transactions or time constraints felt strangely intimidating. "Sure," James heard himself say. 9 minutes later, Ruby emerged from behind the counter, apron removed, revealing jeans and a faded Seattle University t-shirt. She carried a mug of tea and a plate with 2 cookies. Sustenance, she explained, placing the cookies between them. Baked them myself this morning. You bake? Future bakery owner in training. She took a sip of her tea. At least that's the plan. You want to open your own place? Ruby nodded, breaking off a piece of cookie. Small bakery cafe. Nothing fancy, just good food made with care. She pushed the plate toward him. Try one. Honest feedback only. I don't need millionaire politeness. James took a bite and was immediately struck by the perfect balance of chocolate, salt, and something unexpected. Is that cayenne? Good palate, Ruby looked impressed. Mexican chocolate influence, family recipe. It's excellent, he said, meaning it. Genuinely. Thanks. My parents own Alma Latina in Beacon Hill. I grew up in their kitchen. Pride colored her voice. Been experimenting with fusion recipes, traditional Mexican flavors in American classics. Muddy, smart market positioning, James said automatically. Ruby laughed. Only you would make delicious cookies sound like a business strategy. Force of habit, James admitted. But seriously, there's a growing demand for authentic cultural experiences with accessible entry points. Is that corporate speak for people like familiar things with a twist? Essentially. They fell into easy conversation, James asking about her bakery dreams, while Ruby questioned him about the realities of entrepreneurship. Her 15-minute break stretched to 20, then 30, neither seeming to notice the passage of time. So you started coding at 13? Ruby asked, incredulous. It was either that or sports, and I had the coordination of a newborn giraffe. Ruby's laugh was infectious. Hard to picture the great James Harrington as an awkward teenager. I've destroyed most of the evidence, he deadpanned. Ruby! Lines backing up, Zoe called from behind the counter. Duty calls. Ruby stood, gathering their empty mugs. Thanks for sharing your break with a mere mortal. Thanks for the cookies and conversation, James replied, surprised by his reluctance to see their time end. As Ruby returned to work, James checked his phone. 17 missed calls and 32 urgent emails. Reality crashed back, the pleasant interlude already feeling distant. He left enough cash to cover both their drinks and headed for the door. Same time Monday? Ruby called after him. James turned, catching her eye across the crowded cafe. Count on it. Later that evening, Ruby found herself thinking about their conversation while helping at her parents' restaurant. James had surprised her. Beneath the polished exterior and business jargon was a person with genuine curiosity and unexpected humor. You're distracted, mija, her mother observed as they counted inventory. Boy trouble, Ruby snorted, just thinking about the bakery plan. Elena Martinez gave her daughter a knowing look. The same plan you've been thinking about for 3 years, or is there something new? Actually, Ruby hesitated. I might have found a potential location. It's a long shot, but there's a small space opening up near Pike Place. Her mother's eyes widened. That's expensive area, Ruby. I know, but the foot traffic alone would make it worth the investment. Ruby's excitement bubbled over. I've been running the numbers, and with my savings plus a small business loan. Loan? Her father's voice interrupted as he entered the storeroom. What loan? Ruby's enthusiasm deflated slightly. It's just an idea, Papa. Francisco Martinez set down the box he was carrying. Banks don't give loans to dreamers, Ruby. They want collateral, proven business models. I have a business plan, and my credit is excellent, Ruby countered. And experience, references, customers. Her father's tone wasn't unkind, but practical. Your mother and I worked 15 years in other people's restaurants before opening Alma Latina. Times are different, Francisco, Elena interjected. Ruby has her degree in business. A degree doesn't teach you how to keep a restaurant alive when the health inspector comes, or the supplier doubles their prices overnight. Francisco sighed, placing a hand on Ruby's shoulder. I'm not saying don't dream, Mika. I'm saying dream with open eyes. Ruby nodded, swallowing her arguments. This was an old conversation, one that always ended the same way. with her parents concerned for her future and Ruby frustrated by their caution. Later, as Ruby waited for her bus home, her phone pinged with a notification from her banking app. The monthly transfer to her bakery fund had gone through, bringing the total to just under $30,000. Impressive for years of saving from waitressing wages, but nowhere near enough for a Pike Place location. Would she ever get there? Or would her dream remain just that, a dream? Monday morning found James arriving at Emerald Corner Cafe earlier than usual, coffee the farthest thing from his mind. Over the weekend, a potential crisis had emerged. A security vulnerability in their flagship product had been discovered internally, thankfully before any breaches occurred. The team had worked round the clock to develop a patch, but the incident had left James shaken. "You look like you spent the weekend debugging code rather than enjoying it," Ruby observed as she prepared his cortado. "That obvious? The bags under your eyes have their own zip code," she replied, then softened. "Rough weekend?" James surprised himself by answering honestly. "Security issue, handled now, but it was touch and go." Ruby nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The price of building something people rely on." "Exactly," James said, struck by her insight. "Here." She placed his cortado before him, along with a small plate. "Experimental recipe. Might help." On the plate sat what appeared to be a miniature cinnamon roll, but the aroma suggested complexity beyond the standard pastry. "Cardamom, orange zest, and a hint of saffron," Ruby explained. "Persian-inspired morning roll." James took a bite and closed his eyes involuntarily. The flavors were extraordinary, familiar enough to be comforting but unusual enough to demand attention, pulling his mind away from security patches and crisis management. "This is," he searched for adequate words, "life-changing, transcendent, worth investing millions in," Ruby suggested with a grin. "Yes, to all three," James replied, surprising them both. "Seriously, Ruby, this is exceptional." A flush of pleasure colored her cheeks. "Thanks. It's for my theoretical bakery menu." "There's nothing theoretical about talent like this," James said firmly. "You should be selling these now." "Working on it," Ruby replied, her expression a mix of determination and uncertainty. "One Persian-inspired roll at a time." Something shifted in James's perspective as he watched Ruby move on to the next customer, her passion for baking evident in how she described the day's offerings. In his world, talent like hers would be fast-tracked, funded, developed. Why was she still serving coffee in someone else's cafe? By the time James left for his office, a plan was forming in his mind, not a business strategy or product roadmap, but something far more personal. For the first time in years, he felt a purpose unrelated to Nexus Technologies. Ruby Martinez had given him more than coffee and conversation. She'd given him perspective. Perhaps it was time to return the favor. "You did what?" Ruby stared at James across the small cafe table, her voice barely above a whisper, but intense enough to make him reconsider his approach. "I mentioned your bakery concept to some investors I know," James repeated, his enthusiasm dampening under her glare. "They're interested in meeting you." It was Friday afternoon, nearly 2 months since their first encounter. Their coffee conversations had become a highlight of James's week, an island of normalcy in his otherwise frantic schedule. "Without asking me first," Ruby set down her mug with deliberate care. "You just offered me up to your rich friends?" James blinked, caught off guard by her reaction. "I thought you'd be excited. These are serious investors, Ruby. They help launch successful businesses every year. And what exactly did you tell them about me?" Her eyes narrowed. "That I'm some charity case, a waitress with a cute little dream?" "Of course not," James protested. "I told them you're a talented baker with innovative ideas and solid business sense," which is true. Ruby's expression remained frosty. "Did it occur to you that I might want to build this myself? That I've been working toward this goal for years without handouts from tech billionaires?" "It's not a handout," James countered, frustration creeping into his voice. It's an opportunity, one that most entrepreneurs would kill for. I'm not most entrepreneurs, Ruby crossed her arms, and I don't need saving, James. The conversation deteriorated from there, both too stubborn to concede. By the time James left the cafe, the comfortable rapport they'd built had fractured, leaving behind awkward silence and hurt feelings on both sides. For the next week, James avoided Emerald Corner Cafe. He threw himself into work, telling himself it was for the best. What had he been thinking anyway, getting so invested in a waitress's career aspirations? He had a company to run, responsibilities that extended far beyond Seattle's coffee scene. But Ruby's wounded expression haunted him, as did the realization that he'd overstepped. He'd treated her dream as a problem to solve, rather than a journey she valued. On Friday morning, unable to stomach another day of terrible office coffee, James found himself pushing open the cafe door. The familiar aroma hit him immediately, along with the awareness that he'd missed this place more than he cared to admit. Ruby stood behind the counter, her expression guarded when she spotted him. He approached slowly, aware of the fragility of the moment. "Double espresso, no sugar," she said before he could speak, already reaching for a cup. "Actually," James replied carefully, "I'll have a cortado, if that's okay." Ruby paused, then nodded. As she prepared his drink, James noticed she wasn't wearing her usual playful smile or making small talk with customers. "I owe you an apology," he said when she placed his cortado on the counter. "I was presumptuous and inconsiderate." Ruby studied him for a long moment. "Yes, you were. I didn't think about what your dream means to you," James continued. "I just saw a problem I could fix, which is your default setting," Ruby suggested, her expression softening slightly. "Something like that." James attempted a smile. "I cancelled the meeting with the investors." "Good." Ruby glanced at the growing line behind him. "We'll talk more when my shift ends. 4 o'clock? Relief washed over him. "I'll be here." By 4:15, James and Ruby were walking along the waterfront, the late October air crisp but not unpleasant. For several minutes, they strolled in silence, the tension between them gradually easing. "I've been saving for my bakery since college," Ruby finally said. "Every tip, every extra shift. I have spreadsheets, projections, a 5-year plan." "That's impressive," James said sincerely. "My parents immigrated here with nothing," she continued. "Built their restaurant from scratch, no investors, no connections, just hard work and determination." Understanding dawned on James. "And you want to honor that legacy by doing the same?" Ruby nodded. "It's not just about pride, though that's part of it. I need to know I can do this myself." "I get that," James said softly. "More than you might think." Ruby raised an eyebrow. "Didn't you start Nexus with a $10 million investment?" "After being rejected by 37 venture capital firms," James replied with a rueful smile. "My parents wanted me to join the family law firm. When I chose tech instead, they cut me off completely." "I didn't know that," Ruby admitted. "Not something I advertise," James shrugged. "The media prefers the overnight success story to the years of ramen noodles and sleeping on friends' couches." They stopped at a viewpoint overlooking Elliott Bay, the setting sun painting the water gold and crimson. "I still believe in your bakery," James said carefully. "Not as a charity case or a problem to solve, but as a viable business with huge potential." Ruby's expression softened further. "I appreciate that, and maybe someday I'll need investors. But right now, this journey is mine to navigate." "Fair enough," James nodded. "Though, if you ever want business advice without strings attached, I do know a thing or two about scaling operations." "I might take you up on that," Ruby conceded with the beginning of a smile. "After all, you did build a billion-dollar company. And you make a life-changing cortado," James countered. "I'd say we're even." Ruby laughed, the sound dispelling the last of the tension between them. "Not even close, Harrington." As they continued their walk, conversation flowing easily once more, James realized something had fundamentally shifted in his perspective. For the first time in years, his company wasn't the center of his universe. He found himself genuinely interested in Ruby's dreams, her family, her perspective on life, not as problems to solve, but as parts of a person worth knowing. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 2 weeks later, Ruby was helping her parents close up Alma Latina when her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Turn on Channel 8 now." Curious, Ruby found the remote and switched on the small TV in the restaurant's office. A local news program was airing, and to her astonishment, the reporter was standing outside her parents' restaurant, where local favorite Alma Latina has been serving authentic Mexican cuisine for over 25 years. The restaurant was recently featured in Hidden Seattle, a viral social media campaign highlighting family-owned businesses. The segment continued, showing beautifully shot footage of her parents' dishes and interviews with regular customers praising the food and atmosphere. By the time it ended, Ruby's parents stood beside her, open-mouthed in astonishment. "How did this happen?" her father wondered aloud. Ruby's phone buzzed again. "Hope you don't mind. No investors, just publicity. Fair?" A smile spread across Ruby's face as she typed back, "More than fair. Thank you." Within days, Alma Latina was busier than it had been in years. The viral campaign had brought in a wave of new customers, and Ruby's social media strategy, finally implemented with her parents' enthusiastic approval, kept them engaged. 2 weeks after the feature aired, Ruby found herself facing James across their usual cafe table, sliding a small box toward him. "What's this?" he asked. "A thank you," Ruby replied, "for understanding the difference between helping and taking over." Inside the box was a miniature version of her Persian-inspired morning roll, perfectly crafted and accompanied by a note. "Your friendship is worth more than your marketing connections, but those are pretty good too." James laughed, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I take it the restaurant is doing well?" We've had to hire 3 new servers and another line cook," Ruby confirmed. "Dad's talking about extending hours, and Mom's actually considering my fusion menu ideas." "That's fantastic," James said sincerely. "It also means," Ruby continued, a hint of nervousness in her voice, "that I might be ready to revisit the bakery conversation. Not with investors," she added quickly, "but maybe with someone who understands both business and the importance of doing things your own way." James felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. "I might know someone who fits that description." "I was hoping you might," Ruby smiled. "Partner." James extended his hand across the table. "Partner." As they shook on their new arrangement, neither acknowledged the electric current that passed between them, or the way their hands lingered just a moment longer than necessary. Some realizations were still taking shape, waiting for the right moment to be recognized. "This is completely impractical," James stated, examining the property listing on Ruby's laptop. "The rent alone would eat half your projected first-year revenue." They sat in a quiet corner of the Seattle Public Library, surrounded by business plans, property listings, and empty coffee cups. 3 months into their friendship, their cafe conversations had evolved into serious strategy sessions for Ruby's bakery. "But the location is perfect," Ruby argued. 2 blocks from Pike Place Market, tourist traffic year-round. "With corresponding tourist district markup," James countered. "What about this one in Fremont? Lower rent, vibrant neighborhood, established foodie culture." Ruby sighed, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Too far from my parents' restaurant. I need to be able to help them when needed." James studied her expression, recognizing the conflicting priorities she juggled. "You can't build your future around their business forever, Ruby." "Says the man who works 18-hour days by choice," she shot back. "Touché," James conceded with a half-smile. Their ability to challenge each other had become one of his favorite aspects of their friendship. "But seriously, have you considered Capitol Hill? Up-and-coming food scene, more reasonable rents, still accessible to Beacon Hill." Ruby's eyes lit up as she scrolled through the listings James had flagged. "This one has potential. Good square footage, recently renovated kitchen. And, James added, it's near that coffee supplier you like, the one with the Ethiopian beans. You remembered that? Ruby looked genuinely surprised. James shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. I pay attention. Something shifted in Ruby's expression, a softening, a question forming. Before she could speak, James's phone rang. Diane, his VP, with another crisis requiring immediate attention. I have to go, he said reluctantly. Board meeting emergency. Go save the corporate world, Ruby replied, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. We'll pick this up later. As James gathered his things, he felt the familiar pull of his two increasingly separate worlds, the structured, high-stakes environment of Nexus Technologies and these stolen hours with Ruby, filled with possibility and unexpected joy. Dinner tomorrow? He asked impulsively. Not to work on the business plan, just dinner. Ruby looked up, surprise evident in her expression. Like a date? The question hung between them, charged with unspoken possibilities. James felt his heart rate quicken. Ridiculous for a man who regularly negotiated billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. Yes, he finally said. Like a date. Ruby's slow smile was worth every moment of uncertainty. I'd like that. Diane cornered James the moment he returned to the office. Where have you been? The Singapore team has been waiting for 30 minutes. Library, James replied, already shifting mental gears. Research. Since when do you do your own research? Diane raised an eyebrow. And since when do you disappear for 3-hour lunches twice a week? I wasn't aware I needed to log my personal time, James said, more defensively than intended. Diane's expression softened. I'm not questioning your dedication, James. I'm concerned. You've been distracted lately. The board has noticed. James felt a flash of irritation. We're having our best quarter in company history. Aye? And everyone knows it's despite your unusual absences, not because of them. Diane handed him a folder. The acquisition deal is in trouble. The Choi family is getting cold feet. That's impossible. We've been negotiating for months. They say you seem disengaged. Diane met his gaze directly. Are you? The question struck uncomfortably close to home. Was he disengaged? James couldn't deny that his priorities had shifted subtly since meeting Ruby. For the first time in years, he found himself looking forward to something beyond the next product launch or quarterly report. I'll handle it, he assured Diane, taking the folder. Set up a dinner with the Choi tonight. Already done, 8 o'clock at Canlis. As Diane left his office, James checked his phone. A text from Ruby had arrived during their conversation. Looking forward to tomorrow. Where should I meet you? With a pang of regret, James typed, Need to reschedule. Acquisition emergency. I'll call later. Her response came quickly. No problem. Good luck with your millionaire emergency. The winking emoji should have reassured him, but James couldn't shake the feeling that something precious and fragile was slipping through his fingers. Ruby stared at her phone, trying to ignore the disappointment spreading through her chest. Of course, James had to cancel. He ran a massive company with thousands of employees and responsibilities she could barely imagine. Date night cancelled. Zoe asked, noticing Ruby's expression as they closed up the cafe. Business emergency, Ruby confirmed, attempting nonchalance. Ah, the trials of dating a billionaire. Zoe sighed dramatically. However will you cope? We're not dating, Ruby protested automatically. We're friends who... We're going to have dinner. Uh-huh. Zoe's skepticism was palpable. Friends who look at each other like that. Like what? Like you're both solving equations in your heads, trying to figure out if this impossible thing could actually work. Ruby felt her cheeks warm. It's complicated. Most good things are, Zoe replied simply. Just be careful. Men like James Harrington live in a different world. Duh. He's not what people think. Ruby found herself defending him. Behind all the CEO stuff, he's actually normal, funny, kind. I believe you, Zoe said, surprising Ruby. I've seen how he is with you. But that doesn't change the fact that his life comes with private jets and board meetings. while yours involves bus schedules and helping your parents with inventory. Ruby had no answer for that. The same thought had occurred to her more times than she cared to admit. Later that night, Ruby's phone rang. James, calling as promised. "How'd the emergency go?" she asked, curling up on her couch. "Still ongoing." James sounded exhausted. "I'm sorry about dinner." "It's fine, really." A pause stretched between them. "I wanted to see you," James finally said, his voice softer. Ruby's heart skipped. "I wanted to see you too." "Sunday?" he asked. "I promised to turn off my phone." "Sunday works," Ruby agreed, unable to suppress her smile. "But I'll believe the phone thing when I see it," James laughed, the sound warming her even through the phone. "I deserve that. Good night, Ruby." "Good night, James." As she set down her phone, Ruby acknowledged the truth she'd been avoiding. She was falling for James Harrington. Despite their different worlds, despite all the practical reasons it couldn't work, despite her own fierce independence, she was falling for him. The question was whether either of them was brave enough to do something about it. Sunday arrived with Seattle's typical winter drizzle, but James barely noticed the weather as he waited at Altura, an intimate restaurant in Madison Valley. He'd arrived early, unusually nervous for a man accustomed to high-pressure situations. When Ruby walked in, James momentarily forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple burgundy dress that complemented her olive skin, her usual messy bun replaced by loose curls that framed her face. She looked beautiful, but more importantly, she looked like herself. No attempt to transform into what she thought a billionaire might expect. "You look amazing," he said as she approached. Ruby smiled, a hint of shyness in her expression. "So do you." "I've never seen you in anything but suits." James glanced down at his casual button-down and jeans. "Thought I'd try blending in with the civilians for once." Their conversation flowed easily throughout dinner, moving from Ruby's bakery plans to James's childhood in Boston, from favorite books to travel dreams. There was no discussion of business strategies or revenue projections. Just two people discovering each other beyond the roles they typically played. "My turn to ask a personal question," Ruby said as they shared a dessert. "Why technology? What made you choose that path when your family wanted law?" James considered the question. "I like building things, creating something from nothing except ideas and code." He paused, searching for words. "In law, you're always working within existing structures. In tech, you can create entirely new ones." Ruby nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. It's why I love baking. You start with flour and sugar, basic ingredients, and create something that didn't exist before." "Exactly," James said, struck by her understanding, "though your creations taste significantly better than my code." Ruby laughed, the sound making something warm unfurl in James's chest. "I don't know, your stock price suggests a lot of people find your code pretty delicious." After dinner, they walked through the quiet neighborhood, the rain having given way to a clear, star-filled sky. Their hands brushed once, twice, before James gently took hers in his. Ruby's fingers intertwined with his, her hand warm despite the cool evening. "I'm really glad we did this," Ruby said softly. "Me too," James replied, stopping to face her. "I'd like to do it again. Often." Ruby's smile was luminous in the soft streetlight. "I'd like that too." The moment stretched between them, possibility hanging in the air. James leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Ruby met him halfway, her lips soft against his. The kiss was gentle at first, a question being asked and answered. Then Ruby's free hand moved to his shoulder, and James drew her closer, the kiss deepening into something that made the rest of the world fade away. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, Ruby's eyes held a mixture of joy and uncertainty. "This complicates things, doesn't it?" "Tremendously," James agreed, his hand still cupping her cheek. "Worth it?" Ruby's slow smile was all the answer he needed. "Definitely worth it." As they walked back toward where Ruby had parked, hands still intertwined, neither spoke of the challenges ahead, the different worlds they inhabited, the practical obstacles, the adjustments they'd both need to make. For this moment, it was enough to recognize that something important had begun, something that deserved a chance to grow. "Is that James Harrington? With a waitress?" The whispered comment carried across the charity gala's elegant ballroom, reaching Ruby's ears, despite the orchestra and ambient chatter. She stiffened slightly, her grip tightening on her champagne flute. 6 weeks into their relationship, this was their first official public appearance together. James had warned her there would be a tension, but experiencing it directly was another matter entirely. "Ignore them," James murmured, his hand warm against the small of her back. "They're just bored socialites with nothing better to discuss." Ruby forced a smile. "I feel like an exhibit at the zoo. Behold, the common service worker, captured in her unnatural habitat." James chuckled, though his eyes held concern. "We can leave if you're uncomfortable. And give them more to talk about? Not a chance." Ruby straightened her shoulders, channeling determination. "Besides, this event supports music education in public schools. I'm not missing it because of a few whispers." A pride flickered across James's face. "Have I mentioned how remarkable you are?" "Not in the last hour," Ruby teased, her tension easing. As the evening progressed, Ruby found herself separated from James when he was cornered by potential investors. Left alone, she wandered toward the silent auction displays, examining the items up for bid. "You must be Ruby Martinez." Ruby turned to find an elegant woman in her 50s, regarding her with undisguised curiosity. Something in her features seemed familiar. "James's mother," the woman clarified, extending a manicured hand. "Evelyn Harrington." Ruby's stomach dropped. James had mentioned his strained relationship with his parents, explaining they rarely attended the same events due to long-standing disagreements over his career choices. "It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Harrington," Ruby managed, shaking the offered hand. "Is it?" Evelyn's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I wonder. James hasn't introduced us, despite dating you for how long now?" "We've known each other for about 5 months," Ruby answered carefully. "How charming." Evelyn sipped her champagne. "And you work at a coffee shop, I understand." The dismissive tone triggered Ruby's pride. "I'm a cafe manager and baker, yes. I'm also developing my own business." "Ambitious," Evelyn remarked, "though I wonder if you understand what you're getting into with my son. James lives in a particular world with particular expectations." "I believe that's for James and me to figure out," Ruby replied evenly. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. "Young woman, let me be direct. The novelty of dating someone unconventional may appeal to James temporarily. He's always enjoyed rebelling against expectations, but eventually reality asserts itself." Ruby felt heat rising to her cheeks. "With all due respect, Mrs. Harrington, you don't know me or your son as well as you think you do." "I know that relationships require more than attraction to survive," Evelyn countered. "They require compatibility. Shared backgrounds, values, goals. James has responsibilities that extend beyond his personal whims." Before Ruby could respond, James appeared at her side, his expression hardening when he saw his mother. "Mother, I wasn't aware you were attending tonight." "Clearly," Evelyn replied dryly. "I was just getting acquainted with your friend." The tension between mother and son was palpable. James placed a protective arm around Ruby's waist. "Ruby is my girlfriend, Mother. I'd appreciate it if you'd treat her with respect." Evelyn's smile was brittle. "Of course, dear. I'm simply concerned about your happiness." "My happiness is not your concern," James replied coldly. "It hasn't been for years." With a nod to Ruby, Evelyn departed, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. "I'm sorry about that," James said quietly. "She had no right to ambush you." Ruby's mind whirled with Evelyn's implications. "Does she have a point, James, about us being from different worlds?" "No," he said firmly. "Don't let her get in your head." But as the evening continued, Ruby couldn't shake the uncomfortable awareness of the disparities between them, highlighted by the luxury surrounding them, the deferential treatment James received, and the curious glances directed her way. The following week brought fresh challenges when Ruby's photo appeared on a gossip site, accompanied by speculation about her relationship with Seattle's most eligible tech billionaire. Her social media accounts were flooded with friend requests and messages from strangers, some supportive, others cruelly questioning her motives. "This is insane," Ruby muttered, showing James her phone screen during their dinner at her small apartment. "Someone actually asked if I'm pregnant with your meal ticket, baby." James set down his fork, his expression troubled. "I should have prepared you better for this, I'm sorry." "You didn't create Seattle's gossip mill," Ruby sighed. "It's just jarring. Having strangers speculate about your life." "We could issue a statement through my PR team," James offered. Ruby laughed humorlessly. "That would only feed the frenzy. Billionaire issues statement defending Waitress girlfriend." "No thanks." James winced. "When you put it that way." "Hey!" Ruby reached across the table, taking his hand. "I'm not blaming you. I just need to adjust to this new reality." James turned her hand over, tracing patterns on her palm. "What if we got away for a while? My place in San Juan Islands. No press, no socialites, no interruptions." The idea was tempting, escaping the scrutiny, having James to herself without the constant reminders of their different circumstances. Yet something held her back. "I can't just disappear, James. I have responsibilities. Shifts at the cafe, helping my parents, pursuing funding for my bakery." "Just a weekend," James pressed. "You deserve a break." Ruby hesitated, then nodded. "A weekend sounds perfect." The San Juan property was not the ostentatious mansion Ruby had half expected, but a modern cedar cabin nestled among towering pines, overlooking a pristine bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows captured breathtaking views, while the interior offered understated luxury, handcrafted furniture, a gourmet kitchen, and an expansive deck. "This is gorgeous," Ruby breathed, taking in the panorama of water and islands. "It's my favorite place," James admitted, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. "I come here when I need perspective." The weekend unfolded in a bubble of contentment. Cooking meals together in the well-appointed kitchen, walking along deserted beaches, talking for hours beside the fireplace. Away from the pressures of their everyday lives, they discovered new dimensions to their connection. On their final evening, they sat on the deck watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, a bottle of wine between them. "I wish we could stay here forever," Ruby sighed, leaning against James's shoulder. "We could," he replied, his tone casual, but with an undercurrent of seriousness. "I can work remotely when necessary. You could develop your recipes here, maybe even open your bakery in Friday Harbor." Ruby sat up, studying his face. "You're not joking." "Not entirely," James admitted. "I've been thinking about scaling back at Nexus, maybe stepping into a chairman role rather than CEO." "Because of me?" Ruby asked, alarmed. "Because of us," James corrected, "but also because I've been re-evaluating what matters. Before you, my company was everything. Now," he shrugged, "I want more balance." Ruby's heart raced with conflicting emotions. "James, I would never ask you to step back from something you've built from nothing." "You didn't ask. I'm considering it because I want to." He took her hand. "Ruby, these past months with you have shown me what I've been missing while building Nexus. I don't want to miss any more." The sincerity in his eyes both thrilled and terrified her. "This is happening so fast." "Is it?" James questioned. "We've known each other for months. We've spent more meaningful time together than I've spent with anyone in years." Ruby couldn't deny the truth in his words, nor the intensity of her feelings for him, yet doubt lingered, fed by Evelyn's comments, the gossip articles, and her own insecurities. "What if your mother is right?" she finally voiced her fear. "What if we're just too different to make this work long-term?" James frowned. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know," Ruby admitted. When we're alone like this, it seems so simple. But back in Seattle, with your world and mine constantly colliding, they're not separate worlds, Ruby. They're just different aspects of one world, our world. James's gaze was steady, unless you don't want them to be. The question hung between them as the last light faded from the sky, leaving them in the gathering twilight on the precipice of decisions that would shape both their futures. Reality reasserted itself harshly upon their return to Seattle. Ruby arrived at Emerald Corner Cafe Monday morning to find Zoe waiting with a grim expression and a local business magazine. "You need to see this," she said, handing Ruby the publication. On page 6 was a photo of Ruby and James at the charity gala, alongside a brief article speculating about their relationship's impact on a potential merger between Nexus Technologies and a competitor. The final paragraph mentioned sources close to Harrington, suggesting the relationship was unlikely to withstand professional pressures. "Professional pressures?" Ruby echoed, her stomach clenching. Zoe squeezed her shoulder. "It's just gossip, Ruby." But the article's implications followed Ruby throughout her shift, compounded when James texted that he needed to cancel their dinner plans due to merger complications. The timing felt too coincidental, too aligned with the article's claims. When her shift ended, Ruby made an impulsive decision. Instead of heading home, she took a bus to Nexus Technologies' downtown headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that embodied the distance between her world and James's. The security guard in the lobby eyed her warily when she requested to see James Harrington. "Do you have an appointment, miss?" "No, but Mr. Harrington is in meetings all afternoon," the guard interrupted. "You'll need to schedule through his assistant." Ruby felt herself flushing with embarrassment. "Could you at least tell him Ruby Martinez is here?" The guard's expression changed subtly, recognition flickering in his eyes. "One moment, please." He made a phone call, speaking too quietly for Ruby to hear. After hanging up, his demeanor warmed considerably. "Ms. Martinez, Mr. Harrington's assistant will be down shortly to escort you." Minutes later, a polished woman in her 40s appeared, introducing herself as Diane. "James is just finishing a video call. I'll take you to his office." The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent and uncomfortable, Diane's curious glances making Ruby acutely aware of her cafe uniform and hastily applied lipstick. James's office was exactly as she'd imagined, spacious and minimalist, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular city views. What she hadn't expected was the group of executives still gathered around a conference table, their conversation halting abruptly when she entered. Among them sat Evelyn Harrington, her surprise quickly masked by a practiced smile. "Ruby," James stood, clearly caught off guard by her appearance. "Is everything okay?" The situation suddenly struck Ruby as absurd. Her impulsive visit, the staring executives, James's evident discomfort. What had she been thinking, barging into his professional domain? "I'm sorry," she said, backing toward the door. "This was a mistake. I shouldn't have interrupted." "No, wait," James started, but Ruby was already retreating, cheeks burning with mortification. In the elevator, she pulled out her phone and sent a text. "I'm sorry about that. We need to talk, but not at your office. Call me when you're free." Hours later, having replayed the humiliating scene countless times in her mind, Ruby opened her door to find James standing there, concern etched across his features. "I've been calling," he said. "Your phone's off." Ruby checked her device, discovering the battery had died. "Sorry, come in." Once inside, James didn't waste time. "What happened today? Why did you come to the office?" Ruby handed him the magazine. "This happened, combined with your cancelled dinner and your mother being in that meeting." James scanned the article, his expression darkening. "This is garbage. And my mother was there because her law firm is handling regulatory aspects of the merger, not because of us." "Is it garbage, though?" Ruby challenged. "Are our worlds really compatible, James?" "Because today made me feel like an intruder in yours." "That's not fair," James protested. "You surprised me in the middle of a sensitive meeting." "And that's exactly my point." Ruby's frustration bubbled over. "In your world, everything is sensitive meetings and merger complications. My showing up in my cafe uniform was embarrassing for you." "I wasn't embarrassed," James insisted, though his hesitation spoke volumes. "You were," Ruby said quietly. "And that's okay. It's natural, but it highlights what we've been avoiding. We live different lives, maybe too different." James moved closer, taking her hands. "Ruby, every relationship has adjustments, compromises. Yes, our backgrounds are different, but what matters is how we feel about each other." "Feelings aren't always enough," Ruby replied, tears threatening. "Sometimes practical realities matter too." "What are you saying?" James asked, his voice tight. Ruby took a deep breath, forcing herself to voice the conclusion she'd been wrestling with all day. "I'm saying maybe we need to step back. Figure out if what we want individually is compatible with what we could have together." The pain in James's eyes nearly broke her resolve. "You want to break up?" "I want us to be realistic," Ruby corrected gently, "before we invest more of ourselves in something that might be impossible." James stood silent for a long moment, processing her words. Finally, he nodded, his expression resigned. "If that's what you need, I'll respect it. But Ruby, don't make this decision based on my mother's opinion or some tabloid article." "I'm not," she assured him. "I'm making it based on what I saw today, how different our worlds really are." As James reluctantly left her apartment, Ruby fought against the hollowness spreading through her chest. She'd done the sensible thing, the practical thing, so why did it feel like she'd made a terrible mistake?